So it's the end of 2022, and with the latest releases from Nvidia with the RTX 4090 and 4080, and with AMD already launching their response to that, it truly feels like owning like a high-end GPU in 2022 and going into 2023. It truly feels like a luxury, and for a lot of people they're just much better off just spending their money on a PS5 that are much more readily available these days and just forgetting about PC gaming altogether. But you know, coming from a guy like me that has been gaming on a PC as well as on the console, but mostly on the PC for years and years since I built my first one when I was 12 or 13, I truly feel like a lot of people sometimes miss the entire point of playing on the PC and the way that the market is structured and the price differences and how certain games push certain features. It truly makes you feel like you may be missing out if you don't have the latest and the greatest. And the entire point of this video is to sort of like dispel this myth and try to show you practical examples of how you can much better configure your games to just make use of your RTX 2000 or RTX 3000 that you probably already have, and they're probably much more than capable for your current display, unless you are one of the like very lucky few to play regularly on like an LG C2 at 4K 120 Hz. Unless you're there and playing AAA games, trying to max out all the graphics, which we'll touch on this a little bit later, the 4090 will be underutilized for 95% of people, and the final 5%, you know, they probably can't afford it, even though they probably shouldn't buy it, because what are we encouraging here? Like, when is the pricing gonna stop? I really feel like this time they went too far, and there's a lot of good things that we can do to remedy that. Now, take it from me, a guy that usually looks to crank everything to ultra, and you know, sometimes I'm just left wondering, wouldn't I just be better with some of these settings slightly lower and having a less expensive GPU? And that's the entire point that I'm trying to drive here. Sure, it's nice to know that you're getting the best possible experience, but you'll be hard-pressed to notice the actual differences in a side-by-side, let alone in actual gameplay. And it's settings like these that are usually used in most benchmarking comparisons, so if you see a GPU that's borderline almost 60 FPS, you'll easily get to 60 by just tweaking a couple of things. And thanks to the great work from channels like Digital Foundry, you can very often find optimized settings that aim to offer better performance than Ultra with minimal visual compromises. Just look at this side by side from a couple of games recorded in the highest possible quality. On the left, you will always have the Ultra settings, everything cranked to the max, and on the right, I'll display optimized settings. Also, keep your eye on the frames per second on the top right corner, since that's probably the biggest change you'll see between the two. And also, the performance numbers will scale differently depending on your configuration, but it's very likely that on more story-based games, you'll be more GPU bound, and that's where these optimized settings usually shine the most. And for more competitive and less demanding games like Apex and Overwatch, I honestly believe you should simply lower most of your settings and just target this high FPS as you can and just forget about the visuals for the first couple of weeks. And then you'll just more than likely be used to how the game looks, and you just can move on from there. You shouldn't try to make your game look like a potato just to get more FPS, but lowering certain graphics all the way to low in these competitive titles has a massive impact on your input delay, and that has a much bigger improvement to your overall experience than just a little bit of something pretty in the background that you are 99% of the time not gonna notice. And plus, if you lower your graphics just enough, you in certain games get improved visibility, and you know, that's in a lot of cases a complete no-brainer. One final note about DLSS, and particularly the lack of DLSS 3 support on RTX 2000 and 3000, and honestly, I probably wouldn't worry too much about it for the time being. Yes, in certain games it can have a positive impact on performance, but more often than not you're trading input delay for higher perceived smoothness, with some slight artifacting in certain scenarios. Much like the first iterations of DLSS traded big amounts of visual clarity for more performance, and later on, the clarity reduction became much more controlled, resulting in an overall no-brainer for a lot of games. Also, keep in mind that for DLSS 3 to work at its best, you usually need to have some performance to begin with, so it isn't really magic to turn 30 to 60 FPS, but it's much more effective at turning 60 FPS to look like 120, even though your input delay is still gonna feel mostly like 60. But for story-based games, that really is a very good feature. But for the time being, if you're looking into it like from the budget perspective and trying to get that 60 FPS mark, I don't really feel like it might be the feature that you should consider if you're looking into the brand new GPUs. And coincidentally, the new GPUs are just cranking out FPS as high as it can possibly go, so you're probably not going to be needing any more FPS in most titles. Some exceptions, but most titles you probably will not be using it. So in conclusion, and as a final word of advice coming from a passionate PC gamer that cranks everything to the max as often as possible, just skip RTX 4000 for the time being. The value is simply not there. And same thing goes for AMD's new GPUs. They're cheaper, but the performance gap that you get from RTX 3000, for example, really isn't there for the amount of money that you're actually paying over it. So if you can find an RTX 3080 or 3090 for a good deal, maybe that's a good option for you, and just consider just tweaking a couple of settings down and you will get plenty of performance from any type of game that you probably want to play, unless, 4K 120Hz OLED TV, trying to max everything out, you can't do that unless you have 4090. So if you're on that team, just have fun. But for everyone else, just save your money. And spend it like importing mouse pads from Japan, like we did on a previous video. I'll leave that linked all the way up there. But you clicked on this video, watch it all the way until the end. Nothing to do with GPUs. You're just here to watch my cat Gatsby walk outside in the snow for the very first time in his furball life, and I'll very gladly share that with you. I'll just leave the blooper in. Huge thanks for watching. Bye.
Mm.